And so I think that helped a lot, that I didn't mind being dumb, being inexperienced, not doing things right. For me, that was part of how you do things.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore and our co-sponsor, Mass Humanities, I am very pleased to introduce tonight's talk with Nell Painter in conversation with Sarah Lewis discussing Dr. Painter's latest book, Old in Art School, a memoir of starting over.
It's an honor to be able to come here to speak with Nell Painter about this extraordinary book, which I can even feel in the audience you are all excited about as much as I am. So we're going to have half of the time dedicated to our conversation and half for your questions, maybe a little bit more than that. I'll read to you what I wrote about the book, and I want to have a conversation about why I wrote this. Nell Painter's masterful, disarmingly witty, hilarious, and profound book, Old in Art School, will change your perspective about what is possible in the full arc of a life. The award-winning historian and the Edwards Professor of American History Emerita at Princeton University decided to start over and pursue a new career as an artist at the age of 64. Her probing book about this art school journey, as sage as it is humorous, revels in the untold magic of exploring how beginnings can happen at all stages of the journey. This is indispensable nourishment for the creative soul.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah is one of the people who not only made this book possible, she made possible my survival in art school. She's my mentor and my teacher. Yeah.
It's mutual here, this exchange.
A lot of people know you that way. Yeah, it's true.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, you're a sage.
Just keep talking.
Yes, you're a sage. When I decided to leave my professorship at Princeton, that seemed to be the most shocking part. And people would say, oh my gosh, how could you leave a professorship at Princeton? You have to write about that. So when I started writing, it seemed like that was going to be the topic of the book, the leaving Princeton part. But as I lived it and as I wrote, that just became a tiny, 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 itsy bitsy, teeny weeny little part. And the part that Sarah talked about, who's an artist? What is art? Who decides? What are the criteria? Those became the questions that go throughout the book. And of course, there are as many answers as there are artists, practically. One of the things I learned is that there are way more really good artists than we have room to recognize them. Mm-hmm. And there's so many different ways of making art that you can't say, oh, a bottle that looks like this, that makes you think, oh yes, that's a plastic bottle with water in it, that is the way to make art. There's so many different ways to make art, and there's so many artists making good art. And it took me a long time to realize that I could be one of those, and I could even be a bad artist, because there are lots of ways of being a bad artist, too, that people think are being an artist.
Yes. Well, you're making me want to start in a different place, actually, because one of the reasons that I think speaking with Nell and our friendship and fellowship and reading the book is so generative is because you get us to understand the paradox of mastery, really, actually. Nell is masterful in her work as a historian, right? And what's so revelatory about this book is that you're able to take the wisdom that comes from having arrived at a place of authority in your career and in life, and then use the vantage point that you have there to both let yourself be an amateur, right, to begin again, but to also see with that wise perspective what others who are much younger than you are going through without that kind of sense of mastery as they begin again. And that's the double sort of lens of the book that makes it such a thrilling read. Did you get a sense of operating from that perspective as you're writing it?
No, I didn't. I didn't. You're not being the author, but being a reader who knows this. You know more about it than I do in many, many ways. What I felt was a gift to me as an old person in art school, and that really was the salient issue. People say, oh, but you're black, and that's a big deal. Yeah. Oh, but you're a woman, and that's a big deal. Yeah. Oh, you're a black woman, and that's a big deal. But you try being an old black woman.
Yeah.
There's a challenge. Yeah, and only we tough people. Yeah. So, but I was old, and you know that you learn things as you get older. Like, when somebody does something really stupid, you just say, Henry, that's bullshit. You don't crumple up like a young person might, thinking, oh my God, Henry's right. I mean, I did crumple up. I partly crumpled up. I said, Henry, that's bullshit, and then I crumpled up. But I didn't stay crumpled.
Exactly.
And so that was one of the gifts of being old. And I'm gonna have them do it. Old. So when I started writing, people would say, what are you writing? And I would say, old in art school. And they'd say, oh, you're not old, you're older. Yeah. And I must say that if I had known, this is what we were talking about before, if I had known as much about old when I titled this book, I would have put an asterisk by old, because in art school, if you are over 28, you are old.
That's right.
And in life, if you're a woman and you're over 35 or 36 or 38 and you're looking at 40, you are feeling old because you are getting disappeared in the way that old women get disappeared. So you don't have to be 64. You can be old, or you can feel old, or be made to feel old at 29. Yeah, but about old. My mother, I could talk a long time about my mother, so buy the book and read about my mother. But she wrote, her second book was called, it was a memoir, I Hope I Look That Good When I'm That Old. That's because that's what people said to her. She was in her 80s, and she did look really good. But she also looked old. I mean, there's no question about her having work done or, things like that. She looked like a handsome old woman. So she said, you can write a memoir, which is really about you or about me. It's not about being black in America. It's not about fixing American history or telling. I mean, many artists do this. Many artists do that. They use their work for that work. But I am not one. And my mother's memoir said, I am an individual. I, Donna Irvin, am an individual, and I have had my own individual experience, and it's worth your reading this to find out about it. So that was one thing. And then she also used the word old in the title. And there are two words in American English that people stumble over, and one is black. Have you ever noticed that sometimes people are talking to you and they're going to say black, but they kind of... You ever notice that? Kind of hesitation before black? And looking at you, I know you're probably old enough to remember when black was a really bad word. And that if somebody called you black, those were fighting words. And then there came 68 and 70 and Black Power and Black is Beautiful. And you could say Black. And I would say, oh, Sarah Lewis is a gorgeous Black woman. And Sarah would say, yes. Yeah. But I mean, you wouldn't say, oh no, I'm Negro,
Right.
or I'm colored, or something
You'd
like that.
embrace it,
Yeah,
yeah.
you'd embrace the Black. Plus, you are really good looking anyhow. But so anyway, Black. And 50 years ago, as Randy Kennedy reminded us, came the song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And that's kind of a turning point for when people could say Black and proud and feel good about it. So I'm using old in that same way to give old the beauty. And so this afternoon I was over at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, of which I am a member. And I had a very distinguished audience. And I asked them to do something that I'm going to ask you to do. To say with me, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, out loud. And to say with me, out loud, say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. Can you do that? Can you say it really loud? You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I have my mic.
Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Oh, yeah, let's have some fists in the air. Yeah. Say it loud, I'm old and
I'm proud.
come on.
No! Oh, that's the point.
Black.
Oh, you're right.
See,
There
exactly.
you go. We need solidarity. So for you, we have to say it again.
All right.
Say it loud. I'm old and I'm proud.
Proud.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, that kind of ability to get into somebody else is part of what'll get us through this time we're in. I don't want to talk politics to you, but just remember that. So every morning, just get up and say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. Yeah, say it loud, I'm Black, I'm old and I'm proud, I'm old and I'm proud, I'm Black and I'm proud, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
this point about embracing age
Yes.
and where one is
Yes.
comes up for me in a couple of ways. Well, number one, what you should know about why I wasn't fully surprised that Nell embarked on this journey was your mother and father lived to an age older than I think many of us assume that we'll be graced with and still have all of our senses at in our late 90s. Yeah. So you saw the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s as ones in which you wanted to have a full career and perhaps live in a way that you hadn't before. And so this became a natural decision point, right? But and that's rare, and it's really, and I mean, you probably aren't surprised to know that given our friendship, it's made me think about my life differently and what my 70s and 80s and hopefully 90s will look like. Yeah. But I'll also say about age, the reason why I'm so excited to talk with you about this book is that it's one of the most hilarious books I've read because of how it embraces age. And I would read drafts of the manuscript. And I realized that I couldn't take the drafts with me and read it in public because I would laugh so much. People thought I was insane. But the draft almost always began this way with a memory of being at Mason Gross.
No, this is
sorry,
RISD.
what, RISD?
RISD,
No,
yeah.
Rutgers.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're on chapter 1. Yes,
Chapter
yes. It used to always start there. Yeah.
With this one moment when you had a woman ask you, no, it's a young girl, how old are you? That was the question she asked. And it wasn't just that got me. And I'm going to just read to you how you phrased it here. After you told her 64, you said you never lied about your age, but that she then stood, gasped, mouth open, actually taking a step backwards away from me, eyes all amazed, not hostile, just stunned. And she then said, I've got to tell my mom about this. And she did, right then. And it's a wonder I didn't take a selfie with me. But it made me realize the way in which you're almost both a spectacle for people, but then became an ethnographer, in effect, like looking back upon them, you know. So that kind of wittiness just permeates the whole manuscript and the whole text. But what took you a while to embrace, I think, that position of being in a BFA program and then an MFA program as something that you could write about, right? When did that shift occur? Because you didn't always go in thinking that you'd write a manuscript about the experience.
No, not always. I do keep a journal.
Yeah.
So I have many, many volumes of, I mean, who wants to know? But it's all there. It's all there. So I do write about daily life. Mm-hmm. But the idea of making this as something standalone, that, I don't know when that came, but I do remember early on at RISD, when we had a particularly vexatious crit, and Corrinan, one of the students, said, I hope somebody is taking notes on this. And I said, somebody is. Yeah. Yeah. So I have not heard from my colleagues in the painting program. I have not heard from my teachers.
None of them? Really?
I'll tell you who I've heard from one teacher who was my dear friend, Deborah Balkin.
That's right.
But the head of the trustees of the Rhode Island School of Design is a big fan, he says. And he wants me to talk to the trustees of the Rhode Island School of Design,
That's good.
he says. But he hasn't said it recently.
Well, you don't use anyone's last names.
That's right.
But you do excavate what makes the crit process and the MFA program for the visual arts in particular so tough that someone with as much fortitude and confidence as you had going into it still would experience what many do, which is the almost deliberate breakdown of one's practice and also almost spirit.
Oneself.
Yeah. In order to be put back and reconstituted anew. So you do vividly account for that. So it's not fully a surprise that maybe there's some silence. It's an excruciating experience, but you came out of it so beautifully. But you also did tell me that so many of your colleagues wanted to know how you did it, right? How you're able to survive the MFA process and the experience, and how you came to this decision that maybe that was one of the reasons that you wrote it too.
That was the very beginning. Mm-hmm. People not so much wanting to know how I would survive, because they didn't know I was going to be beaten down into a tiny, pathetic little nub. And that was part of it. People said, oh, Nell, you're so tough and strong and smart. How could they beat you into a nub? Because they beat everybody into a nub.
Yeah.
But I will say, I remember one particular instance. I had made 4 or 5 or 6 little drawings from Sylvia Boone's book. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I was using photographs in this way, and I wasn't sure about how I was doing it, or the color, or the technique, or anything like that. So I showed them in Crit at RISD. And people were interested in the backstory, which is a long backstory that I'm not going to tell you, but part of it also does have to do with the Harvard Divinity School. Not in the images. But they couldn't say anything about the images. And if you show your work and you get silence, at least for me, that's negative. So I was really crushed, and I also didn't hear what I needed to hear about the formal value of the work. So I put those pieces and some other work that also was mystifying me in terms of how it would look to other people. I put it in my little diesel station wagon, and I drove it down to New Haven. And my dear friend, Enkijo, looked at my stuff and gave me a crit, which was so valuable because they looked at the work. They really looked at the work and they talked about it. And what I came back from that was there were works that I wasn't sure about, and maybe they had weak parts. And the way they talked about him was not so much, oh, this has weak parts, but maybe you can work more on this. And on the strong parts, you should definitely do more like this. So what I came away was, keep making your work. Keep making your work. Keep making your work. And that, for me, is what a crit needs to do. It needs to spend time with your work and grapple with it seriously, not just sort of pass over it because it doesn't look like somebody else who's popular work,
Right.
and to keep you going.
There's so many things I want to say here. We hardly have enough time, but there are a couple of things that you're raising here. One is a point about value.
Yeah.
It's a huge topic that I think the art world struggles with as it relates to subjectivity. Who do we value such that we then appreciate their work? At what age can then one produce such that their work is of value? All of these things you kind of went into the cauldron of and wrote about and understood. So there's value, there's confidence too. Why is it, and I'm going to think about Alice Neal in this conversation, that anecdote you offer here. Why is it that I think this idea of confidence resonates so much with those who read the book? I think women too, of a particular age, as we'll say, women. There's this line that stays with me. It's on page 89 of the book. And you're reflecting on the 1974 retrospective at the Whitney of Alice Nell Painter's work. And you said, I was struck that after so many years of keeping at her art, it took the Whitney retrospective to justify her work in her own eyes. Alice Nell said, quote, "The show finally convinced me that I had a perfect right to paint," she remarked at the time. Reading that statement, I thought it was so like a woman. She was 74 years old. So like a woman that it took until then. So that's one of the many reasons that I find sustenance from this book. We don't want to wait until these ages, and why should it take until that stage? But it does toggle back to the value piece, right? So the crit should allow you to do exactly what you described, but just identify what your work is, such that the external voices don't determine the value, right? And so that you do. So I'm thrilled that that's what came out of it. Yeah. Belonging, community, there are many different themes that this addresses, but I want to make sure that we have adequate time for questions. And I think we have enough time now for questions. And if you have them, we have mics, right, running, or no? Do we not have mics running? Oh, I can pass mine. Okay. Yeah. Sure. I just want to make sure they're audible, yeah. Yeah. So let's take a few and then we'll keep talking, yeah.
Right here. Thank you. I can project as well. Thank you, Dr. Painter and Dr. Lewis. My question for you, Dr. Painter, is have you read Pauli Murray's autobiography, Song from a Weary Throat?
I read it a long time ago. More recently, I read Pat Bell Scott's book of Pauli Murray and Eleanor Roosevelt. Yeah.
And that one I haven't gotten to yet, but I mentioned the first one because I finished it. Yes. And the similarities are uncanny because she gets tenure from Brandeis University and then decides to leave it in her 60s and go and become an Episcopalian minister. And there's one anecdote she discusses where she's arguing with a male student who's trying to show her up, and she just demolishes him. And it's a beautiful scene. I haven't yet read your book to see if you have a scene like that. It just makes me think of the lineage, how Pauli Murray did it, you did it, Dr. Lewis, maybe you'll do it, maybe I'll do it. And it's nice to feel like there's a continuity so it doesn't feel like a stop and start. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mine is more of a comment. I actually, about 10 or 15 years ago, I was living in Costa Rica and left my business there and decided that I wanted to become an artist. With absolutely no formal training, I went to Florence, Italy, to one of the best schools, but not by mistake, but not by mistake. And I had a similar experience in that because I had no formal training, I was with all these students who were younger. I wasn't yet the oldest, but I was up there, but all of the other...
Were you over 28?
I was. I was. And there were some students that were older, but they had formal training. So my first critique, it was completely devastating, and the teacher basically just said, well, maybe you want to be a cubist, or maybe you want to be something other than a realism painter or a sculptor. And it was so hard that I went from school to school, came back to the States, and kind of gave it up for pretty much that reason, because I had gotten so many, I progressed and I did better. I went from a stick figure to an actual live model, beautiful looking drawing, but I've not been able to get past that because there's all these voices saying, you started when you were too old. Yeah. So I commend you.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll get a lot from this and maybe actually get back to it. Good.
Yes.
Does an artist need to go to art school?
Does an artist need to go to art school? And here I'm going to talk about MFAs, not just visual artists, but for creative writing and poetry and plays and everything. And it depends on what you want. There's no one answer for everybody. But there is, one of the things I say, people ask me, I've got all these degrees already. I only have 3, but why do I want any more? And I thought, I need, my old black woman self needs all the help she can get. And I know from being at Harvard and Princeton that institutions help.
Exactly.
Institutions help. That's one thing. Another thing is that if you are just making your art or your writing or your poetry for yourself, you don't have to. If you want to get into the world of publishing or galleries or recognition, public recognition, then there are, just as there are in terms of academia and publishing, there are fashions for being recognized. And when you're in a degree program, you are trained in the current fashion. So I remember talking a little while ago to a woman, probably my age, in her 70s, who had been writing poetry for the last several years. And she liked her poetry very much, and the people she spoke to liked her poetry very much. But she said whenever she sent it around to be published, it would always get turned down. And I said that I suspected that part of the problem might be not a question of value, not a question of is her work good or not, but rather that she was probably writing out of her 20th century ears, just as I started by making art through my 20th century eyes. And what the editors were looking for or listening for was 21st century work, just as in art they are looking for 21st century images or imagery. So the short answer is it depends on what you want. And if you want to enter the world, the larger world, then it may be very useful to get now larger world training.
Question, let's see. I was going to go to the one right behind in the blue and then to you. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes,
This is kind of personal because I too had another career and retired and went to art school. I was a surgeon, and I retired and did my BFA and my MFA. And I wondered, when you got done with your MFA, how did you determine your next set of personal goals? Because at that point, I was kind of like, well, I've done it all. I want to make art, but I needed something a little more substantial for that.
I have a chapter called Now What? Yes, exactly. And it starts with a friend who's an established artist who's saying, in effect, well, do you expect you're going to have a career? He didn't say it like that, but that's what I heard. I only had 2 goals, and you had those goals too. Get your BFA and get your MFA. Okay. But I didn't have another goal. Just as when I make art, I don't have an ideal piece that I'm making. I make a piece and then that suggests something else and that suggests something else. And it may go off in many different directions, but it's not a goal out here. It's a little one. Just do this and then do that. So what I ended up with, I did land on my feet with a residency in a Faro gallery, which is a gallery in Newark. And there's a group show on right now, and I have a piece in it. And so for a year, I had a home with other artists, and that was a great step forward, just finding my place. And then the next thing was something that I shared with Sarah, actually. We were both on that panel at the Met talking about African art and New York modernism. And I said, if I'm going to talk at the Met, I'm going to show my own artwork. So I ended up making what became first an artist book, Art History by Nell Painter, Volume 27. And I had so much enjoyment and satisfaction with that, I made Art History by Nell Painter, Volume 28. So I make artist books. That's how I finally found my way.
Can I just add one little footnote, although footnotes are now verboten because we've discussed how difficult it was for Nell to stop using footnotes even in her paintings. So
Yeah, I did make a painting with footnotes.
She did make a painting with footnotes. That I hope that the process can also be the goal, which is what I've also learned from this fellowship we've had here. But I want to get to the next question. So the next question, let's see.
In blue.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then in the back.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It's really wonderful to hear you speak.
Speak up.
It's wonderful to hear you speak. I just wanted to make one comment and one question. I don't know if people here will think artists. I've been an artist and sabotaged myself a lot and been scared of it a lot, but keep coming back to it. And one of the most important books that really helped me is called Art and Fear. And it said to me, no matter what, just keep doing it. Yes. Just keep doing it. And so I just want to put that out there for people if you're struggling. Just keep doing the work. It really helped me. And my other question for you was, when did your desire to become an artist happen? I mean, was it since you were a child, or was it just, how did that?
Yeah, in case you didn't hear, the first part was the recommendation for a book that I also swear by. It's called Art and Fear. And the other part was, when did I want to be an artist? To be an artist. I have a lot of trouble with that. But that's, yeah. So my father taught me how to draw. My mother taught me how to read and write. And I drew and drew and drew and drew. And in fact, in this book, there are 3 drawings, I think, from the 1960s. So for a little while, I was an art major at Berkeley, but I got a C in sculpture. And I did not get C's. I mean, I did get that C, but I earned it by not doing any work. I thought, well, if I've got talent, I don't have to do any work. It was all about talent. Yeah. Everybody groan with me. Oh, groan, yeah. What a great audience. Say it loud, I'm old enough. So I thought, I don't have enough talent. Plus, I didn't know any artists. I didn't see a way to go. I come from an academic family. I knew I was a good writer. I knew people who wrote. So my mother was a great writer, so that was the way I went. The eye stayed with me a long time. So I'm a knitter, and I've been knitting for a very long time. Would you like a sweater? And so that was how it came out for a long time. And then Sojourner Truth, who didn't read and write, and I have to say this, Sojourner Truth did not say, aren't I a woman, or ain't I a woman, or any of that. Frances Dana Gage put that in her mouth 12 years after Sojourner Truth spoke in a meeting, and it has become an easy way for Americans to express the fact that there are black women among the feminists and there are women among the nationalists or the activists. But Sojourner Truth's life was a very rich one, and she shouldn't be simply tossed off with a slogan, especially one that she didn't say. So I forbid any of you to use that ever again. So Sojourner Truth got me into the visual because she didn't read and write, but she had her photographs made. And so I went over to the wonderful art history library at Princeton and started learning about the rhetoric of the image. And I really enjoyed it. I thought, I think I'll stop being a historian. I retired a little early. I said, I think I'll stop. I think I'll do something different. I think I'll go to art school. And I was finishing up History of White People while I was in art school, which I don't recommend to you. No, but it's a very visual book. Those of you who know History of White People probably see the artist eye in the book, and the visual concerns in the book. So I tried out the studio school art and drawing and painting marathon, and I could do it. I could stand up for 8 hours a day in an unair-conditioned studio and draw and paint. And I did. I mean, I commuted from Newark every day, 5 days a week for 5 weeks, from North Newark to A Street. I would get there on time, and I would stay all the way through, and the kids would come late and fart around and leave early. And I said, yeah, I can do it. And now I think of talent as the interest that keeps you doing something for a long time. In the back.
Yeah, I'm thinking to go back to school for a master's degree. So did you take your GRE to go back? Because I really don't want to take a standard test again.
I didn't get the last part.
A GRE.
Yeah.
So did you take it to go back school?
No, I didn't. But I already had a BS from Berkeley, an honors BS from Berkeley. So I had already done that part. And Rutgers was very nice to me by giving me credit for, all those, like my logic class and my botany class, all of that. So I didn't have to retake. I just had to take the classes that referred to the art. So no GRE. But I did have to send in my my transcripts, yeah. I did, and I discovered that I started Berkeley with about 5 or 6 AP classes. Wow.
You can transfer some credit.
Yes.
Okay.
But I should have stayed longer as an undergraduate. I made a bad decision, and I have a chapter called A Bad Decision. Yeah.
Because I got my college degree 35 years ago already. So I really don't think I'll be able to take any standard test. I mean, I can go class to study, but I don't think I can pass any standard test.
Well, 2 things. Probably you could, but the second thing is probably you can talk your way out of it.
Because she's old.
Yeah.
Should we talk about one thing you couldn't talk your way out of? This is one of my favorite anecdotes of the book. I just have to share. So Nell, we're here at the Harvard Bookstore. You've been here many times to speak about your...
I presented History of White People here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Acclaimed, award-winning historian. When writing your MFA thesis at RISD, Nell Painter was asked to go to the writing center.
And she went.
And she went. Just to show you that she got out of taking the standardized test, but not out of going to the writing center. No one gets out of going to the writing center as a student.
I had to go to the writing center 3 times because I was writing something different from what I had ever written before.
Because they couldn't handle that she was who she was. But your book was being reviewed in the New York Times, on the cover of the New York Times, and the week later it's go to the writing center. It just to show you the absurdity, the hilarity of some of this. Next question. Let's see. Yes, we had a few. There was a few hands in here. I don't know if we've answered your questions or if you now have decided not to take your GREs too. But we have time for a few more here. Yes.
So I'm curious about the lighting critique bit, because to me, I look at, I don't really want to go back to school, I still teach.
Like, I have a specific question down.
It's just such a turn off to me, that I would spend so much money and time to have people not bruise my ego, but not necessarily give me the time of day to help me get where I want to go.
So how else are you going to have people look at your work? You know, ask your mom. No, you need the credit.
Lucked out with our classes, but it's lucking out.
No, I'm going to stand up for crits. But if in your classes you don't get useful crits, find where you can get useful crits. And another good thing about being old is I knew a lot of people. And so I knew the people who would give me useful crits. Yeah. There was a question way in the back there.
Oh, yes.
Pertaining to what you were just talking about, going from this esteemed, recognized expert to a beginner, what lessons did you learn? Did you learn things about yourself, or did you gain any wisdom about life, or going through that process of great challenge? What was that like for you, and what did you take from it besides the improvement in art skill and so forth?
The question is, what did I take from the experience besides getting some skills? But did I learn some, like, maybe life lessons about myself? Yeah. One thing I already knew, which encouraged me just to do this, was my husband and I had taken German lessons in Berlin in 2001. We had both studied German as undergraduates, he in Princeton and me in Berkeley, in the 60s. So you can imagine the state of our German. So we took classes, and of course we made a lot of mistakes. My husband, Glenn, was mortified when he made mistakes. I didn't mind. And so I think that helped a lot, that I didn't mind being dumb, being inexperienced, not doing things right. For me, that was part of how you do things. The second, I mean, I learned a whole lot more, but I'm going to stop with just one lesson that's in the back of the book. Do not see yourself through other people's eyes.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it, because this is what I've learned from you so much. So, I mean, and also one of the, I think, the koans that kind of runs throughout is to have the courage to honor your dream in a way that isn't just a cliche, but that allows you to put some kind of sweat equity behind it, you know, and to derive from your own biography, whether that is the case, or from the experience of others, the examples you need to inspire you onward to do precisely that, you know, and it's been so encouraging. So, yeah. Any other last question?
Right here.
Did you consider going back to school part-time versus full-time? And do you have any advice, you know, one way or the other?
Yeah, part-time, full-time. When I first was sort of entertaining the idea of art, people said, you know, you don't need more degrees. And at that time, the Newark Museum had classes. So I took a class, I took a pastel class, and it was taught by a really nice man. But the aesthetic was very different from what I wanted. And I realized there that that was not going to do it. So for me, I was fortunate enough, and I am the most fortunate person in the world, and I am the most grateful person in the world, that people said, why did you do it? And I say, well, I wanted to and I could. But not everybody who wants to can. So I have a supportive spouse, my patron. So I had the money. Art school is atrociously expensive. And then I thought my parents were stabilized. Turns out they weren't. But I thought that I was in a place where I could dedicate myself. And I thought my book, The History of White People, was done. Well, it turned out to last a whole lot longer. But if you have some of those things that I thought I had arranged, like if you have responsibilities to children or grandchildren or parents, or you're short of money or you're short of time, then working part-time is a really good idea. But I do say to people, if you want to progress in your craft, do take at least classes. Don't just sit by yourself. Yeah.
Okay. So I feel very much as if we're kind of sitting at Nell Painter's feet, wanting, receiving wisdom and advice, which is so much of what the joy of reading the book. But you're also reminding me that we're expressing or we're receiving your brilliance in a different way. There's a quote that I love from another artist, but this time a musician, Thelonious Monk. And he comes to mind here, and he offered this piece of wisdom, but I'll change the gender on it.
Yes.
He said, a genius is he or she who is most him or herself. I think that's so much of why we really just esteem you and just love this book. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you. Thank you.